Octava edición del Congreso CESPE 2023.
Segundo Congreso Internacional de Educación Emancipadora. Se abren las puertas hacia una visión crítica y emergente de la educación latinoamericana. Con la participación especial del catedrático Peter McLaren, embajador de la pedagogía crítica mundial.
I want to thank Carlos Viltre Calderon for this wonderful invitation to speak to you today at this really important conference that's occurring at this moment. I want to speak to you today about digital technologies. I think it's an important topic. I haven't been writing about it for very long, but I think it's important that we address the topic of post-digital fascism, especially today. The transnational capitalist class is looking to new digital technologies to create a new round of expansion and prosperity, which will lead to a new social contract with workers that basically amounts to little more than slavery, where 80% or more of humanity can't consume with the inequality that currently exists. William Robinson has published a book called The Global Police State, which addresses what he calls militarized accumulation, that is, expanded systems of warfare where border walls are erected for refugee control and mass systems of incarceration and systems of state surveillance and tracking are created. This is immensely profitable for the war industrialists, as you can imagine, who in the face of economic stagnation, help keep the economy going through social control, through cyber warfare, and conflict of various types. It is worth pondering what Robinson has said about the recent COVID-19 pandemic. And I quote, "The 10 richest men doubled their fortunes during the pandemic, while the income of 99% of humanity fell during the pandemic. A new billionaire is minted every 26 hours as inequality contributes to the death of one person every 4 seconds." And then this report says the world's 10 richest men more than doubled their fortunes from 700 billion to 1.5 trillion at a rate of $15,000 per second, or $1.3 billion a day during the first 2 years of the pandemic, that has seen the income of 99% of humanity fall and over 160 million more people forced into extreme poverty. If these 10 men were to lose 99.999% of their wealth tomorrow, they would still be richer than 99% of all the people on this planet. They now have 6 times more wealth than the poorest 3.1 billion people on the planet. Well, contemporary civil society is being redefined by the normalization of networked digital technologies in everyday life, many of them setting in motion a dizzying maelstrom of far-right positions, policies, and manifestos on race, ethno-nationalism, anti-globalism, and white supremacy. This increasingly demands that we take online actions more seriously if we are going to comprehend its consequences for our increasingly fragile social institutions. Official and unofficial far-right groups have recast themselves as post-digital heroes, fighting woke culture on the left, and they are winning many of the online battles for the hearts and minds of our youth. Online hate has offline consequences, often with worldwide ramifications, fascism being one of them. The entwinement of far-right hate groups and network-oriented developments in technology can no longer be ignored. And I'm going to be quoting three actually, theorists working out of Germany, Stephen Albright, Maik Felitz, and Nick Thurston, who write in their important work, our technological era is intermedia and digitally driven, one in which old and new interact. In our intermedia tools run software that allows multiple simultaneous user tool and user-user interactions with a global and local scope. This connectivity makes the online and offline responsive to one another, and their growing argumentation makes them increasingly interdependent. For those post-digital far-right actors leading the current resurgence, intermedia systems are not neutral communication tools. Rather, they are a catalyst for highly social processes and forums where political opinions are created, expressed, and practiced. These media are mediating politics. They connect larger audiences more quickly and widely. They allow for autonomous spreading, circumvent regional and national restrictions, can host parallel channels that range from open access to the encrypted, and use overlapping frames, feeds, and windows to keep politics, digital citizenship, and users' personal lives in constant contact. A mixture of fear, sex-ridden narratives, and cannily crafted rage can be manipulated into trustworthy algorithms of hate that networks can rely upon in order to attract viewers. And in the post-digital hands of far-right, techno-savvy political actors, these algorithms of hate can play havoc with their viewers' insecurities, producing online effective publics whose digital interactivity is guaranteed to create chaos in the open digital space of today's attention economy that controls how much time we are likely to focus on a particular issue or event. In a social universe of high information density, these online publics are now focusing on the demonization of teachers and normalizing hatred directed towards them by people who have recently described, for instance, union leader Randy Weingarten, the teachers union leader, president of the American Federation of Teachers. They're calling her the most dangerous person in the world. This is an example of how online demonization can affect the teaching enterprise. Due to the socio-technological infrastructure of social media, the normalization of previously unacceptable attitudes and utterances towards teachers can occur through the employment of strategies similar to those used to foster anti-immigrant bias on the Mexico-United States border, for instance, such as the creation of ambient forms of anti-teacher bias through the sheer pervasiveness of stories accrued and cross-referenced in the social media. This creates an in-group victimization and out-group stereotypes, producing specific types of affect, motion, through manipulation of emotions in forms of what we could call surplus enjoyment, through selective exclusion of information, the algorithmic clustering of social media content in groups, remediating, recontextualizing, and reframing mainstream news stories, often amending them with clickbait, sensationalist commentary that amplifies and mainstreams xenophobia, and through a reliance on the commercial architecture of social media for the production of imaginary others so loathsome that they can be viewed as legitimate targets of opprobrium and violence. Well, post-digital fascism is a digitally born movement that's been rebranded by populist authoritarian leaders, like Donald Trump, for instance, who are exceptionally adept at strategically permeating society with their toxic, their racist, white supremacist systems of intelligibility and their post-truth utterances that have replaced intersubjective understandings of truth with instrumental reasoning and a technocratic rationality via a wide spectrum of internet forums, communities, and websites. Open societies operating in the existentially mediated currents of our digital condition, right? And of course, I'm referring here to Web 2.0 and social media websites that facilitate user-generated content, interoperability for internet users, and an interactive participatory culture. With their revved up, often hysterical network masses most vulnerable to those digital hate cultures. Their trending hashtags on Twitter that facilitate the message transfer between different platforms, their fake profiles, their fake accounts, their automated bots, and flawed algorithms. Their algorithm-based curation of interaction, and their wide dissemination of far-right tropes in online spaces, leading to an exponential dispersion of hate. All of these factors are impacted by structural inequalities that underwrite their industry and are prone to perceptual manipulation by far-right social actors trapped in the prison house of interactive social media, especially in the case of the highly fluid and ambivalent variant of digital fascism that Malik Felix and Holger Marx have described. Ideas are now traded in a marketplace of race, class, and gender dynamics through the synergy effects afforded by cross-sector mobilizations and the increased speed of transnational exchange that makes pre-digital transactions seem as ineffective as using, say, Morse code to debate existential philosophy. How do we change the fascist ecosystem? How do we transform the internet that has given fascism a competitive edge over other forms of government? If we shut the fascists out, we are, in some major instances, going against our own liberal principles of free speech and free expression. So we have to focus on the structures of perception produced by the new post-digital fascism, rather than focusing on, say, individual actors. But how do we target post-digital fascism if it's built into the very post-digital structures of our central nervous system via our internet cosmology? Do we assign responsibility to those who create the fundamental algorithms and provide the structures beneficial for fascist dynamics? Do we put providers of social media under the threat of hate crime? How do we restrict the opportunities for gaslighting and metric manipulation? How do we intervene in the structures that allow those synergy effects that amplify hate? Do we make providers of digital platforms responsible for the content shared via their infrastructure or user registration systems that enable fake accounts? Well, all of these suggestions by Felix and Marek are good ones. And we have to reckon with the fact that some may be at odds with the prevailing norms of freedom on the internet and may possibly undermine liberal principles themselves. For those of us who are fighting for a socialist alternative to neoliberal democracy's law of value, post-digital fascism poses an urgent threat to the survival of freedom itself in the ways that information technologies are being used by capitalism to create capital mobility across national boundaries that have culminated in what we can call the national security state of widespread social surveillance, helping the United States achieve full spectrum dominance as an imperialist military power. It means that we must strive to create a revolutionary anti-fascist project that attempts to change the world into one of unrestrained mutual assistance and inescapable selflessness, to create a social universe untouched by value production and monetized wealth, where we share in a communion with others, where power is concentrated in the community, where social relations are humanized and differences respected, where we avoid fascism in our politics, where we avoid authoritarianism in religion, paternalism in our social relations, patriarchy in our families, ecocide in our relationship with nature, and epistemicide in our relationships with other groups, communities, and countries, where we no longer die with weapons in our hands, where we can heal ourselves so that we can see others clearly and with compassion, and where we are enwrapped in possibilities for a socialist future. For those of us who worry about technology transformed into an ideological weapon of death, we need to build strategies to combat soft power fascism, a fascism that results in death by 1,000 cuts across our digitalized brain, a mind makeover that has given us death by digital lobotomy, by cleaving away our defenses to our own unintentional fascist devices. For those who have witnessed technology in the service of high-tech imperialism and as a means to reshape the world geopolitically, we are required to do more than understand how the world's information supply chain is being hijacked by world superpowers, and how consumer technology has removed the imagination and replaced it with the artificial dreamscape of Google-run trend analysis and heralded as open democracy. We need to find ways to break out of the digital echo chamber that turns our lives into the search for more and more objects of hate through new forms of gaslighting and metric manipulation. We need to get on with the challenge by developing an anti-fascist post-digital critical pedagogy. People like Petar Jandrik and others have been working in this area, and we must bring a sense of urgency to this task if we are to survive not only as critical educators, but as human beings, because we are being fashioned in ways unbeknownst to our capacities for understanding. This will take the creation of new sensibilities and habits, like Marxist proletariats who possess the means to become the grave diggers of capitalism. We can refuse to participate in digital fascism, not by withdrawing into the hinterlands of post-digitalist future, but by creating a social universe where those who contribute to the production of fascism are not only identified, but held accountable. If we are serious about freedom and liberation, we need to move on this project now. We've got very little time to lose. We need a post-digital pedagogy that can help us develop policies and practices for our post-digital world, including the geopolitical dimensions of that world. We need to call for the creation of a liberating public sphere where the ethical imperatives drive, where critical ethical imperatives drive our concept of community. We would do well to follow Benjamin Green's recommendation when it comes to the challenges of digital technology. That is, by advocating an education founded on a critical social ontology, a community fostered around ethical critique that provides what Green calls a framework for a system of post-digital collective education. He describes such a system as in possession of the means of establishing what Petar Jandrik calls the post-digital trialectic of collective intelligence. We think, we learn, and we act. And for Green, this trialectic represents a coalition of praxis-based in co-constructed knowledge and methodologies aimed at overcoming the inherent challenges to a post-digital society marked by social division, multiple discourses, and impaired democracy. We need to do this by instilling young people with the ability to critique a form of modernity rooted in a deontological knowledge economy based in individualistic rationality. For example, post-truth populist narratives of xenophobic patriotism and nationalism, right, which is so terrible, which has now marked the United States in ways that I could scarcely imagine when I came to the United States in 1985 to begin my work with some of the wonderful educators here, like Henry Giroux and Donaldo Macedo. The critical social ontology that Green and others are talking about can provide a sustainable means by which our current post-digital global risk society may engender an open system of education based on what Green calls self-reflexive, democratic, collective intelligence. So, to end, we need to resist the creation of today's fascist global village. It's not enough to recognize, it's not enough to recoil at how the aggregation of fascist prerogatives through the intersectionality and intermediation of platforms run by ideologues like Donald Trump, clickbait operators and influencers for hire working for gangster capitalists, paid for by members of Washington's chaos caucus, are contributing to this reality. We need more. We need more than trusted flaggers, digital trainers. We need more than independent auditors. We need more than artificial intelligence-assisted content moderation and counter tactics. We need a critical pedagogy and a philosophy of praxis that can create a world dominated by spaces of collaboration whose members actively participate in grassroots, anti-racist, and anti-hate communities, devoid of the alienation that results from the virus of capitalist value production. We need cultural workers who view pedagogy not as a career, but as a way of life. Thank you.